I'm Scott Lucas. 2.5 years ago, the Populism in Action project launched under the directors, Professor Daniele Albertazzi, Dr. Stijn van Kessel. It's pretty ambitious, to say the least. Supported by the Economic and Social Research Council, right-wing populist parties were going to be studied in 4 countries: Finland, Switzerland, Italy, and Belgium. The findings wouldn't just be about the leadership at the top. Who are the members? How do they use media? Are they having an effect? And in the course of that 2.5 years, as we all had to deal with events, how did right-wing populism shift and adjust, talking about the ideas of a pandemic or about changing political patterns, not only within populist parties and competition within them, but within the so-called traditional parties of the center left and center right? We've seen a lot of academic articles come out of the project based on the fieldwork, articles for the general readers, for example, on the University of Birmingham website and .ea Worldview. We have seen excellent webinars and seminars based in Ireland, in the UK, and beyond. And we have seen a special issue of Politics and Governance, the 4th issue of 2021, with 12 contributions, 12 case studies, going beyond the 4 countries of the project to go further in terms not only of what has happened with populism in the past, but where we are today. So it's a real pleasure to sort of not only review what's happened, but to look forward to say hi to Daniele Albertazzi of the University of Surrey.
Thanks
Stijn
for
van
that
Kessel.
Introduction.
And Stijn van Kessel, don't cut me off yet. I can't cut Stijn out. Stijn van Kessel of London's Queen Mary University. Now, gentlemen, I welcome you both.
Thank you. Quite an introduction.
Thank you. Thank you. We're only supposed to be talking for 15 to 20 minutes, and I'm trying to compress these incredible achievements. Let me go across to each of you and say, and let me start with you, Stijn. After working with this project for 2.5 years, and working with it not just as an academic, but almost as someone who's sitting here in the UK watching all these changes go on around us, if friends or family member came up to you and said, look, what's the one thing that you've really gained from this project? What's the one thing that others can gain from this project in terms about politics and the lives that they lead? What would it be?
Yeah, it's clear what we've learned clearly, and that was also the goal of our research, is to kind of open the black box of these parties and how they operate and what drives the members of these parties, sort of the ordinary grassroots members, as well as the party elites, to build organizations that still rely on what we refer to as the mass party model, a very famous concept in political science. So a party that actually still builds a large organization, relies on members, socialize these members through various activities. And it's, I think our research has clarified that this model, or at least parts of it, is still very popular amongst this type of party. That party elites still see the benefits of it in terms of gaining support, gaining visibility, and also legitimacy. And also the motivation of ordinary members are interesting, because party elites of radical right-wing parties do not tend to provide their members with a lot of powers in terms of the general direction of the party, in terms of ideological choices. However, these members seem quite happy, or at least most of them seem quite happy with this kind of arrangement. They like being amongst like-minded members. They feel that they are part of a community which still values national traditions, which they feel are under threat. They tend to show quite great confidence in their leaders. Not everyone. It's also important to note that we see variety also between individuals. So some members, in fact, complain about not getting enough attention from their members, or their leaders, rather, their leaders not listening sufficiently to their demands, etc. So I think ultimately we learned a lot about what goes on in these parties.
So Daniele, let me kind of ask you the same question. The one thing we could gain out of this, but let me sort of build on what Stijn has said to put this to, arguably mobilizing members is what all parties would try to do. So is it the case that right-wing populist parties have just been better at it? Their organizations have been better at it? Or is there something distinctive about the content of right-wing populism that gives them an advantage over their counterparts on the left, left-wing populists, and the mainstream parties?
Well, let me say, first of all, that while in our own project, we study 4 cases, so you already mentioned the countries, and they all show that these are parties, they are very interested in fostering the model of the mass party. So that's our own project, which is based, as you said, on a lot of field work. But in the special issue of politics and governance that we've just published, we branch out to other countries and we bring in several really high-profile colleagues from all over Europe. And we don't just look at the mass party, but we look also at populist parties adopting other models, or sometimes adopting certain features of the mass party, but not others. This is important because it means that there is still great variety. But if we look only at the parties that are mass parties, then to answer your question, I think they are using this organizational model to make a point, which is we are not like the others. We are not like these guys over here who are political elites. They are distant from people, are not interested in people. They just spring up as parties before an election. We are different. We are there. We are present. And I think it's interesting how organizational models are inspired by ideologies and are also used to make ideological points about who you are. So as Stijn mentioned earlier, there is also an issue of legitimization. So a lot of these parties are kind of pushed at the margins within their political systems. Some are actually really marginalized very actively. Others are simply always described in very negative terms. And one way they fight back is precisely being present. So being among people, organizing activities, canvassing, being there, even if it is sometimes to be insulted by passerbys, but that has value because it means that you are connected to the community, and also has value because it allows you to listen to what the community says. So it might be potholes, it might be these migrants coming here, it might be the lack of bus routes. Again, it requires a lot of organization and a huge investment of time. But it's very useful. I mean, you can't get all this stuff only through social media because there are still people, for instance, older people who might not communicate with you through social media. So being there, being present has a lot of advantages.
Okay, so I see where the potential advantages are, but in practice, Stijn, if I look at it where we are in 2022, even in the countries which are being studied, has there sort of been a containment of the right-wing populist parties? I mean, I look, for example, in Italy, and at least at this point, both the League and Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy still outside the government. There's still a cordon sanitaire, as far as I know, in Belgium, which keeps the Flemish interest out. The Swiss People's Party hasn't been able to break through in Switzerland as well. And, you know, beyond the project, we could look at AfD has actually been slipping in Germany, arguably on a national scale, if not necessarily in certain regions. And in France, Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National, you know, is actually facing a threat just to hang on versus Eric Zemmour, the upstart TV celebrity with his own arguably more extreme populist, you know. In other words, I understand why we need to study right-wing populism and so on, but is there a lesson to be held here that the right-wing populism right now is actually facing challenges to how far it can go with this organization and mobilization?
Yeah, I guess these are two slightly different questions. Like one is how do they organize themselves, and one is how do they sustain their popularity and electoral success. And indeed, as Daniele rightly said, like in our own project, we study 4 parties which adopt more or less the mass party model, whereas in our special issue, we see that there's quite a lot of variety. So some do adopt more larger organization or try to invest in membership, and others don't. In terms of their electoral support, I would say things change all the time, of course, and Corona has had an impact on what their strategies are. But I would say their success levels it varies per elections, it varies between countries, but the radical right as a whole, as a party family, has now a very stable presence all around Europe, you might say. So it's now become a party family of most West European countries. So I wouldn't say they have necessarily suffered in terms of their popularity. They might face new challenges, how to deal with the COVID crisis, which has kind of pushed their favorite topics of immigration and multiculturalism to the background. So how should they react to it? Should they kind of play the anti-vaxxer card, which might appeal to some of their supporters who are also more prone often to believe in conspiracy theories, because there's a relationship between populist attitudes and believing conspiracy theories, in fact. So some of their supporters may buy into these anti-vaccination discourses. However, they might also scare off more moderate voters or voters who do not buy into these kind of things. So the COVID crisis in particular has given these parties food for thought, how to respond to that, how to respond to the fact that their primary issues are sort of further down the political agenda. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that these parties are now facing existential crises. I don't believe that whatsoever.
Okay, Daniele, I noticed that Tim Bale's just come out with an article. Tim Bale, who's worked with the project on webinars, and he actually has argued, look, you know, the challenge for right-wing populist parties, quite often it's been framed as that to the center left, but in fact, the challenge has really been to the center right, or equally to the center right. And this morning on EA Worldview, I was privileged to publish a piece by Cedric Terrasson about Eric Zemmour in France, again, with his, as it were, party outflanking Marine Le Pen, but the argument being made, this is reshaping French politics because it's pulling the center and the center right towards populist agendas and towards populist rhetoric. Would you argue that's the case, that the biggest success of the right-wing populists maybe not in gaining power themselves, but in reshaping and redefining the center right in Europe?
Yeah, this is a really interesting point you're making. I actually would argue both, in the sense that there are several examples of right-wing populists, or even the populist radical right in power across Europe as part of coalition governments. And one reason is the increasing fragmentation of political systems across Europe, which means that it is increasingly the case that the moderate right will need the more radical right in order to govern. So they shouldn't be dismissed as actors of government. However, you make, I think, a very good point. Their influence is not just if they manage to get into government. There are many different ways of having influence. You can provide external support to government, like the Danish People's Party has done between 2001 and 2011, and get changes to the immigration legislation by doing that. Or, like in the case of the UK, you don't need to be in government to force a more moderate party to become like you. and then arguably, like, you're winning a very big battle, because I mean, I think ideologically, to an extent, the Conservatives have become UKIP. I think it's a huge victory for the likes of Farage. So you're absolutely right. And for the right, obviously, it's easier to pick on some of the proposals of the populist radical right and make their own. But we're seeing increasingly, and that's interesting, across Europe, that even the left is picking up some of these proposals, especially when it comes to, like, who's got the right to draw from the welfare system. How do you acquire this right? Let's make sure that people don't just come in to exploit it. So the truth is these parties have been very influential. Whether we are looking more generally at the populist right, or more specifically at the populist radical right, which is, I would say, the largest subcategory within the populist right. So, and of course, the phone goes on and starts ringing as I speak. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you.
It's probably Matteo Salvini basically giving you a thumbs up in terms of what he's achieved in Italy.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody telling me what's going on with the election of new president.
The new president as well, exactly. Yeah, we'll put Silvio Berlusconi in the past, shall we, and focus on populism with one more big question. And I'm going to kind of ask you all to expect the unexpected. And that is, I mean, I would argue that the unexpected would have been, for example, the historic, basically, number of refugees in 2014, 2015, which raised the immigration issue across Europe. And then, of course, the unexpected of the pandemic from early 2020, to which all parties have had to adjust. Let me ask each of you, beginning with Stijn, if there's one thing we should be watching for which might occur, either within a particular country in Europe or across the continent in the next year or two, what would it be?
It's a good question. Daniele, do you want to go first?
I think a really interesting question, which we know it's going to happen, is how the money of the European Recovery Fund is going to be spent, because one of the ways through which Euroscepticism has been kept alive in recent years, and most of these parties are to various different degrees Eurosceptic. I mean, not all of them are Euro reject, so not all of them reject the project of the EU. Some of them are just mild Eurosceptics, but to some degree, they all tend to kind of jump on this bandwagon. And I think in the near future, a really interesting question is how the money of the Recovery Fund is going to be spent, because obviously at the moment, the fact itself that there is this kind of huge fund that has been set up for the first time in the history of the European Union seems to contradict a lot of the arguments made by this part, so that the EU is distant from our communities, doesn't care about our people. And here you have the EU borrowing an extraordinary amount of money, which was a big thing in countries like Germany or the Netherlands, and supporting countries that have been badly hit by the pandemic, starting with Italy, which is normally described as a country that you can't trust. How are they going to spend this money? So I think it's a big change, and I think it kind of takes ammunition away from many of these parties, and I'm curious to see how they're going to deal with it. Of course, it will also depend very much how the money is actually spent now, because there is a dynamic in place now. Countries have to embark on reforms, otherwise they don't get other tranches of money. How are they going to do this? Some of these reforms are very difficult, so we'll need to watch it closely.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I think, folks, as you can tell from those answers, the work never stops because events never stop. We will be coming at you in future months as the project develops with other discussions, other analyses, other things to watch out for. But for right now, let me thank all of those who are involved in the Populism in Action project. Let me thank the research fellows who have given us so much over the past 2.5 years and continue to do so. Let me thank Josh Allen, who puts this online from the website to this broadcast. And most of all for today, let me thank Professor Daniele Albertazzi and Dr. Stijn van Kessel. Remember, folks, Politics and Governance, Issue 4, 2021. Have a read. We'll be back soon. But for right now, I'm Scott Lucas. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Thanks for watching.